Gay Dave Made Easy kind of mentioned, sure, comic books. I'll talk about comic books. I actually have a huge. I was kind of talking about.
Okay.
I have every comic book ever created from the 1970s onward. When I came to the United States, of course, I read comic books overseas in Europe. The comic books in Europe that were popular were sort of like Donald Duck cartoon, Scrooge McDuck or whatever, and World War II comic books and westerns and shit like that. Those are the kind of comic books you would find in Europe. So as a kid, I would read those. I read Vincent Getterick's. So as a kid, I left Greece. I came to the United States, and lo and behold, I discovered American comic books. I couldn't read English. I couldn't speak English, but I could look at the pictures. So I had my mom buy me these comic books. At first, the only comic books I would buy were G.I. Joe. G.I. Joe didn't come out in the 70s. It was G.I. Combat, Weird War Tales from DC Comics. There was some other Army at War comics, which I think was Charleston Comics. I'm not 100% sure. And then, of course, the Richie Rich and the Little Devil and all these little comic books. But then I discovered superhero comic books like Spider-Man and whatnot once I started learning to read English. And I never looked back. I would read a comic book a day, every day, until like a couple of years ago when I stopped collecting. So I'm going to get into the political side of it. Comic books were always written. There was a mix of ideas in there. Some of them were left-wing writers, ex-hippies or whatever. A lot of them were conservative writers, like the guy who wrote G.I. Joe was ex-military. Larry Hama, I believe his name was. So he had a pro-Ronald Reagan view of the world in G.I. Joe. The guy who wrote Punisher, the comic books were sort of like right-wing. But they weren't right-wing in terms of like talking about economics or anything, Back in the 1980s, if you remember the 70s and 80s, everyone was like pro-criminal. They didn't want, Attica, all that shit. So superheroes were seen as anti-left wing because they wanted to beat up on criminals, So there was there was a left wing element, like Captain America. They kind of made him a little bit left wing. He didn't want to shoot anybody. He was anti-guns. Batman became anti-guns, which is kind of ridiculous because he was, he's a scary criminal, but he's only going to beat you up. He's not going to kill you or anything like that. And Punisher comes along, and he's supposed to be the right-wing guy because he kills criminals, and the other ones weren't killing criminals. Whatever. That was the extent of politics in comic books. There was an actual Captain America comic written by Mark Renwald where Captain America picks up a gun from a terrorist that hijacked a plane and he shoots the terrorist to save lives. And then Captain America is like guilt-ridden and he's like, I'm ashamed of myself and whatever. And then I remember the reaction of Captain America readers writing in letters, what the fuck is wrong with you? That doesn't feel right at all. Captain America killed people in World War II as a soldier. He's not going to feel like he somehow betrayed his values because he killed a criminal, a terrorist. That was the extent of comic book controversy.
Well, there were sometimes, in the past, that sometimes they would be anti-Nazi or anti-communist or something like that. There'd be a little bit of politics.
Oh, in fact, one of the biggest things that the left hated about comic books was that they thought that comic books was used by the government, which is kind of ironic, and I'll get to that. Was used by the government to push, like they actually thought. I used to read this, that the CIA and the FBI was paying Marvel Comics money and DC Comics money to write anti-communist shit, It might be true. You don't know. It might actually be true because the way they would do it is they would hire DC Comics and Marvel Comics to write military manuals as comic books, in Vietnam or whatever. And that was a significant source of income for the industry, which, comic books never made a lot of money. They were always sort of like the lower end of the scale in entertainment. They were like shit. They were like bird lining, bird cage lining. It was something that they made for kids, and the kids were supposed to read it once and throw it away. It was meaningless. So comic books were never a cultural milestone, even if when they were popular, they were never supposed to be something that was so important in society that it was part of pop culture. And then
so there was one called there was a villain. Go ahead and finish what you were saying.
Well, I was just saying, lo and behold, Marvel makes a movie and it's a hit. and suddenly it's a force of pop culture. Like Iron Man makes a movie and it's a hit, and then everyone is excited because Marvel took their formula of having an interconnected universe and putting it into the movies. That's actually an innovation. If you look at all the old Hollywood, except maybe the James Bond movies, Hollywood never could do a sequel well. You know, ever watch like Planet of the Apes? It was great, and then they did the other sequels, and some of them sucked, and some of them were okay, but they were never somehow like
Some of
Westworld.
them were good. I liked. So I don't know if you're talking about the original or the newer ones.
Original.
There was one. It was like Beneath the Planet of the Apes. It was the one that had all the mutants that worshipped a bomb.
Yeah,
I thought that one was good.
it was good, but it wasn't as superior.
They kind of stole that in the Fallout series from that, where there's mutants worshiping a bomb.
Yeah. I always thought. Well, what I'm talking about is it looks like the budgets for the sequels kept going like like in other words they look cheaper and cheaper made. Yeah, like,
I'm not saying they were all good. I'm saying some of them were. But I wanted to mention before when I was interrupting before. So they had an old comic. It was the Hate Monger was the villain, and he has like a hood and stuff. Yes. I think it was Fantastic Four, and then the spoiler at the end, it's Hitler.
It's Hitler. It's a clone of Hitler.
And I think they have like a chance to kill him, and they don't.
Here's another fun fact. Hitler is an actual character in the Marvel universe. They own the copyright to the Hitler clone. Believe it or not, he's a clone of Hitler called the Hate Monger. He comes. The Red Skull actually has him imprisoned in the Cosmic Cube, like his soul is imprisoned. Like the Red Skull is supposed to be a protege of Hitler, and he has him imprisoned in the Cosmic Cube, which is supposed to like make your reality come true, which is what they call the Tesseract in the movies. It's the Cosmic Cube. So like actual Hitler is an actual character in Marvel Comics, which I think is hilarious. It made sense in the comic book. And I was talking about Marvel's greatest idea as a comic book company. I think this is where they're really innovative, is that they created the shared universe. So like Spider-Man actually lives in the same world as the Fantastic Four.
Well, but they do other stuff, like DC does that. There's some like Superman and Batman crossover occasionally.
They did, but they actually Marvel did it first and best, and DC was always playing catch up.
Well, Stan Lee created like a million different like characters and series at the same time.
Well, yeah, and Spider-Man's co-creator Steve Ditko, he was like a libertarian, So, and Stan Lee, I think, was an old-fashioned like FDR type of Democrat, like a '60s type of Democrat. The JFK type of Democrat, which is like rare these days. But like that's the extent of politics.
His last words were like, "Don't make Spider-Man gay."
Yeah. It might be, but then something like in the comic books, people stopped reading them, and then they kind of became like sort of insular, and people stopped reading them, or the ones that read them are passionate about them. And then they became a hit in the movies. And then, this is where the social justice warriors come in. You had these, they're like parasites. They think that they can change culture by like directing pop culture towards these social justice warrior tropes. Like gays. You have to get rid of white people and make them like biracial or blacks or whatever. Spider-Man has to be Hispanic, black, or whatever. I'm okay with new superheroes being any sort of race or ethnicity as possible. And Marvel and DC were certainly not right wing. They were like left wing people that would create these things for the most part. But that's not the point. They're doing social engineering through pop culture. So as soon as comic books became like a pop culture phenomena, they started injecting all these social warrior shit into this. Like Thor has to be a female now, and you don't call her Thorina or Thora. You call her Thor with the same name. It's like
was it going to be like Natalie Portman or something?
Well, yeah, that's going off. That's going off a Thor comic book where Thor is supposed to be.
Well, they were always spinning, even back in the day, they always were spinning off everything where it's like
So they got
there'd always be like a young Ward, and then there'd be a girl version. You know, you have Batman, you have Robin, you have Batgirl.
But it would be
they're always spinning. Even back in the day, they were always spinning everything off. It's just then they got more woke. But I have a question. This is from a few minutes ago. Uncle Bobbity, how long does woke comics have until the social justice scribblers finally collapse under their own smug?
Well, it's collapsing in the comic book, which I stopped collecting about 2 years ago. I stopped. I would collect maybe $300 worth of comic books a month. I stopped. I just couldn't take it anymore. I think it's collapsing now because the problem is all these gay rights activists, you know, and I'm pro gay rights, you know, pretty up to a point. I think adults should do whatever they want. But all these advocates, they don't buy comic books. You know, they're like, we need you to make
they want to aim stuff at women if it's a traditional male market. Same thing with video games.
Yeah.
And so they want to sort of pander to women, and the women still aren't buying this stuff.
No, they're not. I mean, like, you know who? When they came out with the female Thor, I was in the comic book shop when that happened. I know the guys who own Midtown Comics here in Manhattan. They're Greek, by the way. So, you know, I know them. When Thor #1 came out, it's a female comic. I was reading so much in the news. We want women to come and buy our comic books. We want, we want to, and I think maybe the Marvel people bought that bullshit. They actually think like, oh, we're getting this interest from all these females now. Maybe we're going to get a whole new, because their audience was shrinking. People are reading less and less each day of any sort of medium, from newspapers to magazines to comic books. They actually thought maybe girls are going to come into and buy our comic books. I was there in the store. Not one female walked in to buy Thor. You know who bought Thor #1 with the female? I did. Like that other middle-aged man did. All these guys bought the first issue of female Thor. It's the same guys.
They want to see females in comics when they're hot, but then they try and go out of their way to make them not be hot or look like dudes or something.
Right, exactly. And in fact, in my case, it wasn't even a case of me buying a comic book to read it. It's one of these completist bullshits. If you're a collector, you got to own every one.
Oh yeah, where they have all the different variant covers and it's the exact same magazine, but then collectors have OCD and they need to buy all of them.
Exactly. And in my case, I just couldn't take it anymore. I'm like, this is shit. It reads as horrible shit. I don't mind if you throw a curveball to the character. I've seen Captain America quit many times, but there was I've been reading Captain America since the 1970s, and you get a certain feel for the character. So when somebody writes something, you could tell it's wrong. And one of the things that was happening with the modern Captain America is there's a scene where Captain America, he wants to, he's somehow upset or whatever, and he's convincing himself, somebody convinces him to burn all his World War II memorabilia, like his World War II, like a trophy case or whatever, and he burns it. And I remember the episode. I remember reading the issue of Captain America with when Baron Zemo and his Masters of Evil take over Avengers. Baron Zemo, when his Masters of Evil take over the Avengers Mansion, and Captain America is tied up in a chair, and Baron Zemo is crushing his original World War II square triangle shield. He's ripping up a photo of his mom that is the only photo that he has. He's destroying his memorabilia, and Captain America, and he's doing this to torture Captain America because he knows it hurts him. So I remember that. That's a powerful comic book. If you're reading it, you read that comic book and it stays with you. It stayed with me for 20 fucking years. Plus, now I'm reading a comic book from the new left-wing writer of Captain America, whose name shall go unsaid, and Captain America is the same one who's torching his World War II memorabilia, the same thing that Baron Zemo did to him.
He regrets fighting Nazis. What kind of message is that?
Yeah, what the fuck? The message I got is the past is dead. All you old people, all you old timers, all you dare I say white people, but the guy who's writing it is white too. But we don't need to
reboot stuff and make it stupid.
Yeah, exactly. In other words, kill the past, which is what they're doing with the Star Wars shit. Remember, one of the lines of Star Wars would, kill the past. write your own future, whatever. Like, they don't want us to have any connection with the past. It's all like a reboot, a reshaping, ignore everything that.
Yeah, and not without coming up with anything new, at least not very much.
Garbage.
Let's just take something and do like essentially a reboots, like a parody or something, and try and make you forget about the old version.
Yeah, and
I think it's a lack of creativity.
Well, one of the things that got to me was, remember on Twitter, I would say I was cosplaying sometimes when I would go to the comic book conventions. I was a cosplayer. I kind of did it for the kids or whatever. I'm not a cosplayer, but I did cosplay for the Comic-Con. I thought it was fun. So I'm hanging out there, and I'm remembering this conversation I was having with a cosplayer, and she's like, she asked me a question about the upcoming Doctor Strange movie. Like, she never heard of Doctor Strange before, and I'm like, she's like, oh, I can't wait to do the Doctor Strange movie. I want to go as Doctor Strange. And I looked at her and I go, have you ever read a Doctor Strange comic book? And she told me no. And then I go, well, you can't go as Doctor Strange because you're a female. And she looked at me like she wanted to kill me. I'm like,
I don't care if people want to cross dress and costume. I don't care.
Well, no, I don't care either.
Whatever.
But I was telling her, the whole point is, I told her I think she looked more like Clea, who's like another.
No, I mean, if a woman wants to dress as Superman or something, I don't care. That's fine.
Well, I care.
Especially with cosplaying. I mean, you do whatever you want.
Well, I care, but
If a guy wants to dress as Wonder Woman.